Software is an art and is a pretty amazing experience. But when you write software, if you don't write it perfectly well, it is susceptible to attacks. So if you don't check for specific elements, if you don't put the right sanitizers in place and you're not checking for various other types of malicious behavior, you can be susceptible to that software doing things you didn't intend for it to do. When you get into this world of being a founder, it's a very tight-knit community, and we all want to help each other. Like, it's pretty fun. Like, you get folks who are like, oh wait, you're doing this thing? Okay, great. I have these 4 people you should talk to.
Today, we're joined by Surag Patel, co-founder and CEO of Pixee, a company revolutionizing software security with an autonomous product security engineer to free up software and security teams. Surag's startup career is packed with wins, an IPO, an acquisition, and multi-billion-dollar growth stories. With roots in engineering and data, he spent 15 years in cybersecurity, from fraud detection to DevSecOps, helping founders turn ideas into thriving businesses. A master at bridging sales and engineering, Surag leads with strategy and vision. Let's dive into his journey and his bold take on the future of secure software development.
So that particular example that you just mentioned, what you're saying is the market, people told you to do something, the market told you to do something else, and 6 months later, you went down a different path. Again, as you said, hindsight is 2020. Going back, what would you have done differently?
Like, it's to your point, like, what would we have done differently? Like,
Surag, thank you so much for making the time to join us on today's episode of Inside the Silicon Mind. I want to start off by looking back at your career. You've been part of the startup game or the startup ecosystem your entire career. You've been part of billion-dollar companies, IPO, acquisitions. You've seen it all. But what was that defining moment for you, Surag, where you thought, I'm going to do this myself? I have an idea. And it was that moment of spark.
Faraz, like, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here. I wish I had a fantastic story to say. It was a spark that came to me at 2 a.m. in the morning, and I just jumped out of bed and started this company. But for me, it's much more organic. Like, for me, as you said, I've been part of startups my entire career. As a matter of fact, right out of graduate school, went into a startup, saw an IPO, went through multiple other journeys, and saw some amazing outcomes, all while kind of working really with 2 leaders my entire career. I've actually only ever partnered up with 2 managers or leaders in my career, but when it came to kind of this journey, having seen an IPO, several unicorns or decacorns along the way, an acquisition, the idea of starting something really was a very, very organic opportunity. Like, what came up was I was ready to go build something again. That is natural to kind of who I am. I love the process of building. I love the early stage of the company. I was kind of at this point in my career where it was like time to go do something new. And so I knew I came to that conclusion on my own. And then as I was deciding, like, how do I go about this? Would I go start something? Do I go join someone? Do I go join a kind of more mature company? It's funny. I talked to kind of 17 of my mentors, and literally 17 for 17, all of them said, hey, Surag, why are you not starting something on your own? Like, literally all 17, the first comment they made to me is like, hey, before you think about joining some other new startup or some early stage founder or some idea someone has, it's time, like, give it a shot. And for me, it was never that I didn't want to. It was just a matter of like the convergence has to happen, right? The timing has to be right. The idea has to be there. The people that you want to partner have to be available. And so that all came together. And so it actually came together at the perfect timing. I called someone, a really good friend and someone I'd worked with for a long time, and kind of just exchanged some notes. And we both had this like light bulb moment at the same time, which, like, there was a press release for another new startup that came out. And we both were beyond frustrated. Like, why do we need another blank when there's 75 of them out there that just says like one word difference, or they're faster or cheaper or better or whatever? And so we just said, like, enough with the number of companies that are here to help create problems or find things. And why don't we just work on fixing, which all again comes back to a previous mentor who kind of guided me down this path. And so we said, enough trying to give people work to do or create new work. Let's just do it for them. And that's kind of what started the entire genesis of what is Pixee, and really got me to a point where it wasn't about founding, but like being part of the story and building a company around something I'm super passionate about with the people I want to work with when the market opportunity is right for it, is kind of what all came together at the same time. And that's kind of why we're here at Pixee.
17 mentors. I hear, look, it's amazing. I respect that a lot. I have built my career, at least the last 5 years, surrounding myself by investors and founders and lots of them are clients, but ever since I became an investor myself, I've learned a lot through mentors. Books are great. I love reading, and I feel like every new book I read I pick up at least even one sentence in there that could change the game for me. But I do definitely agree with the mentor piece. So 17 mentors, who would you say has been, maybe you don't want to say, but someone who's truly inspired you in your career?
Yeah, there truly are several. Now, also use the term mentor a little bit loosely. Like there's folks like I may not talk to for 2 or 3 years at a time, but when I talk to them, it's so insightful and so valuable. It's you generally a two-way thing, right? It's not just like I'm just absorbing from them. Generally, I'm giving them nuggets, hopefully of value as well as we're kind of spending some time together. Look, there's a couple. I'd say for me, just I'd kind of put folks in like three buckets, right? There's like one is like the folks who are like the very creative, like forcing me to think differently, right? There's a few folks who fall in that bucket that I really appreciate. Like when I feel stuck and I feel like I need something different, like those are the folks I generally call. And then there's the folks who are just like they've been there, done that. They know how to manage a team. They may have been the CEO of a private company. They may have like built like multiple successful things. And generally, these are like folks who know execution inside and out. They're just like machines. They know here's what to do. I've seen that before. Here's how I got through it, kind of stuff like folks. And those are like, those people have been super helpful for me. And then there's like, I just put the founder groups in their own bucket, right? The people who have gone through the journey of like idea to taking the crazy leap of faith, like you start a company and then hopefully building it and being passionate and consistent enough to like kind of drive that to an outcome that is hopefully successful, of course. And so I think those are the three I'd say. I probably have a name in all of the three buckets at least, but I'd say like on the founder side, one, I actually had I'm not sure why. Somehow in every company I went to, I got paired up with the founder, whether that was my job or not, to help them take their next new idea and turn it into a business. Like that was just where I got placed in every single company for whatever reason. But at a couple companies, the founders I got paired up with they were just amazing people, right? They're creative, they are passionate, they're so focused on the idea and the execution and making it a success that oftentimes they're blinded by everything else. And sometimes you have to be, right? We have our ups and downs. There's days where being blinded in tunnel vision is what gets us through to kind of the other side of that rough patch. And so I'd say there's some founders have been super helpful. And for me, with them is like the creativity. A lot of them have very kind of quirky and specific opinions and really opinionated folks. And so like I've learned a lot. Sometimes there's little things that I do with my kids and like, kind of things around the house. And there's things that I do with work and things we do around kind of fundraising. But all of those have come from different people. And I'd say that the founders I've always appreciated like their drive and kind of what I felt like I've had to kind of the muscle I've had to exercise the most the last couple of years of Pixee is like the stuff I've learned from these founders over the years, I'd say.
It's interesting. Right before we started this, you said learn by doing. And as we kick this off, you talk about learning, about mentoring. How important is that in this game of Silicon Valley? Constantly keeping your fingers on the pulse from a learning perspective.
Look, you have to for us. You know this better than anyone else, right? If we're not learning and we're not doing different things and we're not following the market, we're not seeing what's happening in the market we're in, especially in tech, especially in Silicon Valley, not just Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley and the tech ecosystem, you fall out of date within, I don't know, 6 months, 3 months, maybe. Like you got to stay on top of it. And now you can't stay on top of everything at the same time. Like you got to pick and choose the topics and the areas you want to stay on top of. But on those, you got to stay curious. And if you're not curious and learning, you'll become out of date real quick in this market. And like I actually have had the fortune of kind of being born and raised in the Bay Area. So I've lived most of my world in this bubble that we call Silicon Valley. And what's exciting is like you see folks who like transcended decades in this world. It has nothing to do with age, right? There's people who are like the most amazing, insightful, and deep thinkers in different spaces just because they've decided to be like, I'm going to constantly learn. I'm going to be on top of it. I'm going to read about the latest and greatest in AI models or venture funding or product market fit or whatever it might be. And they stay on top of it. So like, I think it's so important that learn by doing what you mentioned is I'm so passionate about it. It was the motto of the college I went to, Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, for those who are aware. And, Cal Poly is known to be like a kind of hands-on university, like great for engineering programs, great for even like agricultural programs, great for like very kind of scientific and deep kind of thinking type topics. And every class we had a lab. Every single one, even writing classes and English classes had a little lab to go along with them. And for us, it was like, you have to do that in that same way. And so I like, as I was mentioning, for me, the quote is great and it's all about doing that. And the way it's even the way I think about learning and the way I think about teaching and the way I think about the products and the way I think about companies is like, you have to make an iterative, constant process. It's a journey, right? It's not a destination. And that idea is you got to learn constantly along the way. That takes multiple dimensions to make that happen. And that's kind of really what we drive behind. So that's stuck with me forever. As a matter of fact, it's core even to the Pixee goal and product and theory is like we deliver learning through doing, like whether we do it for them or we guide them to it. Like the idea is like you're going to learn when it's natural to you. You're not going to necessarily learn by just reading out of a textbook or reading a lab or reading hypotheticals all day long.
Let's go there then. Let's start off with where you are today as the founder and CEO of Pixee. Tell me about the company. What does the company stand for today?
Yeah, so Pixee, our whole idea, as I mentioned before, is kind of the whole thought was like in this world of software security, DevSecOps, application security. There's a many term, product security for this category we're in. The last decade or decades even of solutions have been around like how do we help you find these biggest challenges of flaws, vulnerabilities, insecure code in these areas. Those companies have done a fantastic job. As a matter of fact, I was part of some of those companies. There's many of them out there. They've done fantastic jobs of helping identify challenges in your software, which is like, hey, I'm the expert reviewer of your software, Mr. and Mrs. Developer. I'm telling you there's a problem over here. Great.
I guess bring it down to me, to my level, right? So you're talking to someone who's not technical. As you know, my trade is recruitment and investment. But if you sort of speak to a 10-year-old, and let's use an example, maybe a case study. How would Pixee play in how would it come into that case study?
I've tried this with my 9-year-old. It hasn't. It's almost working, but let's see if we get there. The idea is like, software developers are writing software, right? Software is an art and is a pretty amazing experience. But when you write software, if you don't write it perfectly well, it is susceptible to attacks. Okay. So if you don't check for specific elements, if you don't put the right sanitizers in place and you're not checking for various other types of malicious behavior, you can be susceptible to that software doing things you didn't intend for it to do. For example, leak all of its data, right? And so that's this idea of that's kind of the core of what is behind all these categories of cybersecurity, subcategories of cybersecurity around software security, application security, product security, which is the software is doing something either intentionally or unintentionally that makes it do something malicious or bad, meaning generally it's a data exfiltration or the software will do something you didn't want someone to be able to do. Okay, so that's the challenge, right? Is that software or developers are writing software or they're using off-the-shelf software. All of the software is vulnerabilities. That is not the fault of anyone, as a matter of fact. Writing software is hard and making sure it's like does what you want and is high performance and is secure. Very, very few people can do that, right? And most developers aren't trained to do that really well. And even if they are, there's a million things to think about, right? So the idea is like insecure software is inevitable. People are going to write not perfect software code, right? But just like we have bugs and things like that. That's why there's a whole industry now of tools over the last couple of decades that are looking for these flaws in software to say, hey, there's a problem right there. You should go fix that. Or this problem will cause ABC downstream effects, potentially, if someone malicious finds that flaw in your software. And so that's what this whole industry is about. Let's find these issues, and then let's point them back to the folks who can actually fix them, and let's give them the direction and guidance to go fix it. And so that's kind of the core of the problem statement. The idea behind Pixee is there's enough stuff going back to these people. Like we have a very simple statement we make. Too much is expected of developers. And people, that's the first like topic I usually say when I'm meeting someone new. And they're like, what do you mean? Like we have 10,000 developers. We do expect a lot of them, but that's their job. Like that's what we want them to do is write more software and build more features. And our point is like, you want them to write more features and you want it to be high performance and you want it to be perfectly well written so there's no bugs and it does what you want. And you want it to be cheap and maintainable and secure, and the list keeps going on and on and on, right? We keep adding more things. And so that was where kind of the genesis of Pixee came from. It's like, there's all these tools to help find problems, and that's great. They're doing their job. But to actually reduce this risk that every single software company has is you actually got to take these findings now and then go fix them. And there's only one person in the company who can generally do that. It's a software developer, because they're the ones who write the software. And so Pixie's whole premise is how do we build this autonomous and automated kind of product, what's called a product security engineer, which is a very specific role in these companies that says, let me take these findings, see what's real and what's not real, and then go rewrite your code for you to fix the problem. And so if I had to kind of bring it all the way back to your question, the idea is just like an editor would on any kind of document, or just like a reviewer would, the idea is like, instead of us just giving back to this person more work to do, saying, hey, I found this problem, go fix it. The idea is like, let's fix it for them. Let's automate the process of fixing, because today that is entirely manual. There's no other way to do it. And let's turn them into a reviewer, not the author or the editor. And so the idea is like, we do all the contextual gathering, we do the rewriting of the source code, we give it back to the developer and say, hey, developer, here's the fix, here's the change, here's why, with all the context they need to have. And so instead of taking a day to fix something, they can take 5 minutes and say, hey, yeah, that all looks great, hit merge, move on with life. So they're still part of the loop, but they're not having to author any fixes anymore. We're doing that for them.
So you're not just making them aware of the problem, you're fixing the problem for them.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, this is like, speaking of like starting companies, like we made a very opinionated decision early on. Is like, I'm not in the business of making them aware of the vulnerabilities. As a matter of fact, there's been 15 years of companies who've done that, and some amazing ones at that. And so our whole idea is like, they've done a great job of making you aware of the problem, but that doesn't mean you're fixing anything. As a matter of fact, I talk to companies every day who have hundreds of thousands, or as a matter of fact, just last week, millions of known vulnerabilities in their code from the scanning they've been doing for decades. They just need to get them fixed. It's not that they don't know they have them. It's just a matter of like prioritizing, right? And actually doing the work.
So Pixee is, as you describe it, like a product security engineer, right? Goes in, fixes the problem. Does it focus on specific sizes of businesses? Like as far as your ICP, what's a typical ICP, but also what's the typical size of a customer?
We started early on kind of building, we have an interesting journey here. We started with a free product, an open source product. And the idea there was like, let's get this product out. Let's get some traction and feedback on the product and see what's working and not working. And then provide some value to think of like your students, your open source projects, your kind of small startup, garage startups, right? So we've done that. That's free. Anyone can use it. But what that really was driving towards is the ICP we always had in mind, which is where we're focusing right now, is teams who have generally, let's say, a couple hundred developers or more. So generally, I would say like mid-market plus, the smallest customers typically have several hundred developers. The biggest customers will have tens of thousands, or as a matter of fact, even hundreds of thousands of software developers. And that's kind of the sweet spot, because they're producing a high amount of software, or a large amount of software. And the idea is like, they've generally done two things. One is they produce a lot of software, and second, or they maintain a lot of software. The second is they've already come to the conclusion that security of that software is important. Like, I'm not in the business to explain to someone, hey, you should care about the security of your software. For the smallest of companies, plenty of companies and vendors will help you do that. Our objective is like, once you come to the conclusion that security is important and you have a sizable development team, let us help you eliminate that toil and that pain of using these code scanners that create a bunch of findings, but then there's a manual process to like burn down to actually fix those things. And so we focus on, I'd say, mid-market enterprise, hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of software developers. And the way that we operate is kind of like most kind of SaaS type businesses, is that we sell for a subscription where they kind of use this over some period of time, and then we continue kind of growing and expanding from there.
And how does it sit into a company's ecosystem? Is it happening as the software is being written, or is it a post code?
We do it in the process. So the software development lifecycle, SDLC, that they'll talk about, or sometimes people say the CI/CD, which is technically like at the tail end of that process. In that world is where we operate. Now, our whole design principle as a company and this idea of getting a product market fit was centered around, we want to operate as close to, since we're automating what was traditionally manual human level effort, our objective is to also behave and integrate and weave into the experience as a human would. So if we're trying to build for an autonomous product security engineer, if I had that actual human, where would they fit in the process and how would they fit in the process? So our whole idea is like, we don't do specific things that people ask all the time. Like, hey, are you in the IDE when I'm actually writing the software and just making fixes right there? We're like, no, like, it's not like when I'm working and coding at home, I don't have a product security person standing right next to me, like tapping me on the shoulder every third character and saying, hey, you should actually make that an X, not an R. Like, it's just annoying, frankly, and it's not impactful. But after I create the feature and I submit it for feedback, which is a explicit process in this SDLC that pretty much every company
Before it
does
goes
now.
out. Before it goes out.
Before it goes out. But
Yeah.
in the review cycle, which is where I, as a developer, say, hey, team, I'm ready for you all to give me your feedback before I stick this into the code base. That's exactly where we weave in. So just exactly like a human would is the process where we do it now. Because we're automated, they can ask for feedback and we'll do it in 5 minutes rather than they ask for feedback and get it 1 week later, right? If a human were actually doing it on the other end. So we weave into the development process at the point, not when they're literally writing or hitting the keyboard to type the new code, but in the process of the review cycle before it gets merged into the code base and before it goes out the door. And for code that's already been written, that code that's getting added to or reviewed or checked, that kind of happens after the fact, right? We would kind of come back and make improvements and enhancements to a code base whenever there's new kind of findings to be fixed.
That's pretty cool. So going back to the beginning, so before you started Pixee, you had the idea and it's time to think about the next step. What would that next step be? Or what was the next step for you after you had the idea?
We had 2 next steps. One was about like the business and the company, and one was about how do we do this? Like, how do we make this successful? So, I have 2 parallel things. We actually did them at the same time. First is like validating the problem. And, for as I know, you talk with you recruit a lot of technical folks. For me, when I've led product management teams most of my career, like when I talk about finding the problem, it's talking to a bunch of people who have different experiences and who are different perspectives in the ideal likely target market, and asking them about their experiences. And it's not about like, hey, not getting from them like the features they wish they had. It's like understanding the true problem behind the statement that they're making, right? If they're saying, hey, I wish I had a purple car that went 0 to 60 in 5 seconds, like, what are they trying to solve for behind that? Not what are they telling me they wish they had, right? I think it was just under 400, like 380 something interviews with actual developers. And our whole point was like, I want people who have hands on a keyboard, not the managers, not the people next to them, like not the folks telling them what to do, like the hands on the keyboard folks, and trying to understand from them, like, how do they wish security was engaging with them today? Because they're the ones who can fix the problem. And so we literally did that. And that was all about validating what are the problems, what kind of experience would they like, what would work well or not work well. And so we did that. That was one path. The parallel path that we had was between me and my co-founder is like, what type of team do we need to make this thing successful? And how do we need that team to operate? So as a matter of fact, the first document we wrote together was not a strategy document, was not a fundraising document, was not all this other stuff. It was actually like a principles, like a guiding principles for the company, like how we're going to operate. We're like data driven with a bunch of examples and context. We expect, A players, and here's what that means, and here's how we're going to find them, and here's how we're going to compensate them, and here's how we're going to manage them. Like the human connection matters. We were built kind of during the COVID times or just after the COVID times. So for us, remote work was not optional, or was not maybe, it was expected. Maybe not forever, but that was a default, right? And so for us, like, how do we expect that to happen? Because we do believe human connections are extremely critical. So we wrote all of this out. That was actually the first document we wrote. And still to this day, when we send out an offer to a job candidate, we send with them, with the offer, a principles document, and we ask them, you should review it. If you don't agree, that's totally fine. We should have a conversation about it. This is meant to be a living and breathing document, but we send a kind of our principles document with any and every job offer that goes out the door.
That's incredible. So before you even thought about putting together a pitch deck, you thought about the company you want to build.
Absolutely. For me, it kind of comes down to the experiences, right? Is as I've been part of kind of startups time and time again, you kind of realize, like, what are the themes of what makes companies successful? And there's nothing novel here. You've all heard it many times. Like the team, the execution, and kind of the persistence, really. Like those couple things come together to build for successful companies in most cases. Now, other things have to happen. I generally tack them up to some combination of luck and foresight. But generally, like, the market has to be right. You have to have the right funders. You have to have the right customers. There's all these other things, but like a lot of that happens when you have the foundation of a great team that has the passion and drive, and can execute well, right? And so for us, it was all about that. So the big question, like, as a matter of fact, it reminds me of this quote from a book or blog post, like culture eats strategy for breakfast or something like that. Is something along those lines, right? It's that this idea of like, if you have the right team with the right intentions and the right executional path, you're more likely to be successful in that environment. And so that's why we spent so much time on it. It was so important to us that we do that, do it right. We knew what we liked, we knew what we didn't like. We've been part of different experiences in the past, and that's kind of what we put together in this document. And we wanted, like, for the two co-founders to have that grounding is great, but your company's not built on the two co-founders. Your company's built on the two co-founders plus the first 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 people you hire. And so that first crew, the first group of folks is really paramount to long-term success for the company. And so we're very intentional, both in like our intentions and our principles, but even the people we hired. Like, we spent a lot of time working to make sure we try and get the people that we believe are exactly right for what we need now or early on.
So you have the validation. That's amazing. Speaking to that many people, by the way, that must have. How long did that take?
It took us about 4 months. We stayed in stealth, certainly longer than I would have hoped. But the idea is, like, during that time, we did a bunch early on. We did some midterm. We did some a little bit later in the process. But it took us about 4 months, I'd say, to get through the bulk of that.
But how many did you do before raising your first round?
250, something like that. Yeah, quite a bit. The majority of it.
You're currently, what stage are you at the moment as a company?
We're seed funded at the moment. Yeah.
So you raise your seed round, and as far as that process, because a lot of founders go through that journey of raising capital, what was that like for you?
I'd been through the process of raising capital in past experiences, but more later stage, right? I joined companies as they were raising a Series B or Series C or Series D, and I've led many of those those projects within companies. And so I'd been through the process of raising capital. Now, I'd been through the process not as a founder, but as a C-level executive who's responsible to help drive that forward. And so I knew the process. I kind of knew generally the cycles, but I hadn't ever done it to raise a seed, right? Like, on the back of not, there's different ways to do seeds. There's folks who've like built a product and kind of built some momentum and then go raise a seed. There's other folks like us who had a really strong conviction on a problem in a market and had some proof of concepts effectively on what we knew we could build based on our experiences and some validation we had done, technical validation we had done. Not really a product. We had built a proof of concept, but there was no product. And then we got to go raise capital on, call it 15 slides and an idea. And, of course, validation stuff behind it, but like, that's kind of what we raised capital on. And so that I had never done that before. So we did that. It was a very, honestly, like, truly a fun process. It's kind of like anything else. There's your ups and downs every day, but it was a pretty fun process. I think I took a lot of advice again from folks who had done it before and what they found worked well for them. And that's kind of the same thing we did. We did a really pretty condensed process. We talked with the folks we went into it knowing who we wanted to talk to. We had done our research and kind of said, these are the 9-ish investors that we think are a good fit for us or what we want. The people we know, we already had done some back channel checks on, like, are these right folks, and then ran a very tight ship on the process and kind of got to quickly kind of narrow down, like, who are the ones we really want to work with after we spent some time with them. And then we kind of went through the cycle, but we made it a pretty quick and efficient process for our initial raise at Pixee.
So you did your research, you identified the 9 potential investors you'd like to be backed by. And then did you reach out to them? Did you have a relationship with them or people that knew them?
It was a combo. I don't think there was any, I take that back. There was probably 1 or 2 of them that were kind of a little bit of a cold outreach, but even that was through some, not a direct introduction, but like, hey, we have some mutual connections. Here's how we know each other. But the vast majority, some of them were just folks who we knew or knew us, as a matter of fact, from past lives, and kind of knew we were clicking up something. And so they started pinging us, so that we were fortunate to have that, of course. And then there's the middle kind of group that were introductions, like folks who had said, hey, I've had really good experiences with these few. One thing that is really fun is, like, when you get into this world of being a founder, it's a very tight-knit community, and we all want to help each other. Like, it's pretty fun. Like, you get folks who are like, oh, wait, you're doing this thing? Okay, great. I have these 4 people you should talk to, and they do these kinds of investments, and I'll get you connected. And so, like, they really want to. And then the investors who get intros through another founder that they trust, you immediately have a level of credibility that is super valuable, right? So I'd say about a third were inbound, a third were kind of intros through people that we knew or had some joint connection with. Actually, maybe more. It's like probably like 40-40 and like 10% or 45-45-10 were outbound, cold outbound that we actually reached out. Just literally one, I'd say, of the 9.
Did you have any rejections? Any pitches that didn't
We
go so
did.
well?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
did. We had a couple of rejections. A couple of them were just like, it's not you, it's us type thing. Like we're not in the process. One of them was we just closed our round. We're fundraising for our next fund, and so we literally don't have the capital, which is obviously the one. Another one was the opposite end of the spectrum. It was a very, very large fund, and like, hey, we're closing our biggest fund ever in the multi billions of dollars kind of size. And we just don't have time right now. Even though you're connected with all the right people, we literally are just like underwater getting this fund wrapped up and the marketing around it, that we just don't have time to deal with this, which is also totally fine. I'd say for us, like luckily, like we had a really high percentage of folks who were very interested and excited. There's more of a matter of like, who are the folks that are really kind of passionate about this problem, have some opinions, excitement, and kind of conviction around this problem. And then the folks who honestly had a high level of trust and confidence in me and my co-founder. And so that those kind of two things are what drove where we spent more time, and then we kind of kept driving it from there. But we ran a pretty quick process intentionally because we wanted to get back to building and talking to the customers.
So, Surag, once you raise capital, money's in the bank, off your term sheet, the money's in the bank. What was the first day like? First day in the office?
It's for some people may want to hear this, other people may not. Like I loved wearing different hats, and so for me, first day in the office was like all the stuff you don't want to deal with. Most people don't want to deal with. I had to get an HR system up and running. I had to figure out how to do payroll. I had to figure out how to set up a tax and entity, like all the stuff that's like just not exciting, to be honest. I had to get registered in 2 different states. I don't know if you've ever tried registering state tax accounts in states. It is not fun. Some of them literally require you to still fax paper in. It's kind of ridiculous. But it's like stuff like that. I mean, honestly, that was not just the first day. That was probably the first like 3 or 4 days. Is just the dirty work of starting a company. And so there was that. I had to get a mailbox set up. I didn't want people showing up at my personal home in different ways. And so there's just stuff like that. So I think I'd say that was like the first few days. I actually enjoy stuff like that because I like to think of optimizations. And for me, like as you go through that, it's like the more, even if I spend like 5 extra minutes to kind of spend a few extra minutes doing research and think about it with a long-term view, we spent a reasonable amount of time talking to a couple different like HR payroll type systems with an eye towards like what will help me scale. I don't need to think about 10 years. Well, like what will help me scale through at least this round of funding, maybe the next, to like hire X number of people and kind of do things as automated as possible. Like I have to get laptops for people, or how do we do all that? And so like, we spent a little bit extra time, and I ended up going with a system that was all around automation. And so like today, as we've grown our team, it's super simple. Like if you told me, hey, if I was going to hire someone new in whatever, Chicago, literally in 15 minutes, I can get them an offer that's based on quantified compensation data. They will get an email that will say, what kind of laptop do you want? That laptop will be at their door in 3 days. Like, and I don't click a button. Like it all happens pretty automatically. It's pretty amazing. And so
What system
I'd
is
say
that?
like Rippling. We use Rippling.
Rippling. Okay, yeah, Rippling is cool.
The automation of it is mind blowing. Like it is so impressive on the tough stuff it can do and save a lot of time for the stuff that takes up 95% of the time.
Rippling is a great automated tool. So that sounds like one hell of a journey, and it is the journey that every single founder that we work with, and we, as you know, we work majority of the time with founders, what they've gone through. What would you, when you look back at that period, right, from the validation piece and the connecting with investors, and it sounds like you had your own network, which is great. So maybe the second part might be less relevant because you had the network, but that initial period of validating your idea, what were the challenges that you faced in achieving that process to success?
I think there's a couple. One is like just like you want to get to some level of volume, but at some point it all starts sounding repetitive, right? So you got to try and decipher, like, we had kind of phases of what we would talk about folks. Like we talked about this topic, and then the next 20 or 30 or 40 folks would talk about this topic, and we kind of rotate around, and we keep adding, we bring different visuals and different questions with us. And so I'd say like that is a really important piece is like, how do you keep the content fresh and not feel like you're just in this repetitive cycle of hearing the same thing again and again, and you hear what you want to hear, right? Because we're humans, we're all biased in that way. Like, the reality is like you got to be careful that you're not biasing. And so we would take notes and use differently. As a matter of fact, I wish there was some tooling that I have now that I didn't have then. Like there's this tool called Granola. I'm not sure if you've heard about it. It's all the rage in VC world and Valley. It's this note taker that there's a million of them out there, but Granola is like, it's just pretty amazing. Like it'll transcribe everything and then quickly summarize it in a way where you can even ask a question and get feedback in a really, really simple way. And I think tools like that would have really helped that process. But I'd say it's that notion of like not hearing what you think you want to hear and really trying to be agnostic when you're doing multiple interviews. I'd say that was really tough. The other piece that was, I'd say a challenge kind of in that part of the journey was, you go to who you go to folks who are willing to return your call, you go to folks who are willing to return your whatever LinkedIn messages. And that ends up oftentimes being people that know you, like you, trust you, are friends, whatever it might be, right? And so there's this bias that no doubt in every single conversation you're going to have. And trying to cut through that is really tough, as a matter of fact. I'm not sure we did a fantastic job of that, honestly, in the early days, even of Pixie. But that's something I'd say is really tough. Is that you want to get through that a little bit. And I've read these articles and these like blogs of folks and founders who said like, you got to start like just doing the cold outreach really early, because if you're not getting that feedback in that channel, you're kind of biasing your echo chamber a little bit to the friendlies, which is helpful, but not always the exact right feedback. And so I'd say that was another challenge we had kind of early on in those days.
Yeah. No, I understand, and we see that quite a lot with founders. Is just you go to your network as a first point of call, and naturally they might be could potentially be too nice. They won't tell you what you need to hear. Um, Surag, so what's the future like? What's the future looking like for Pixie? How do you see your company scale in the market, and what does the TAM look like? What's your thoughts?
I'm biased, Faraz. You know this better than anyone. Like I'm the founder of company. I'm obviously very biased what we're doing and where we're at, but I can't say I do this very often. But like right now, I am full in drinking the Kool-Aid in the AI bandwagon. There's no doubt about it. I think the technology, the innovation, the speed, the things that we can do today are materially different than we could do technologically even 12 months ago or 18 months ago, certainly 24 months ago, no doubt about it. And I think we're also not just like have technology that we didn't have available to the masses, let's say a couple years ago, but we do have also a fair amount of learnings. And for me, again, back to this learn by doing, like the rate of change at which the learning is happening right now in this space is what blows my mind. It is amazing. I mean, it's so fun. Like it literally, there's topics that are like coming out, I don't know, the one from last week around this notion of like vibe coding. I'm not sure if you've heard this yet. There's like the MCP on the AI side of like the context protocol between AIs and non-AIs, or AIs and AIs, or AIs and systems. And like all these things are just like hot topics that just like come out of nowhere, and everyone's talking about it for a few days or weeks. And then the next hot topic comes out, the next new model comes out, or the next new training algorithm comes out. And so like I'm all in. I'd say like the future, I would say the future, what it looks like for Pixie, like we are building for a world where we have to harness this technology in the brightest way possible. And like, if you ask me like from a 30,000 foot view, like what are we doing? My job is to make enterprises or end users not have to worry about all the complexity below of what's AI, what's not AI, how it works, how it doesn't work, what's new and what's not, and making that all work. Like my objective is to help them deliver on an outcome. If they want to solve for product security, that's my job. What happens below the surface is they should not have to worry about, as long as they hold me accountable to outcomes. Like that's what I want to sell them. And so our whole objective is like our job, stay on top of the technology, build for the latest and greatest, build to a level of quality and outcomes and expectations that our ICP expects, which is very high because we're aiming at the top of the market, is kind of our future. So TAM wise, it redefined itself. Like it's funny, like every time I've done this conversation in the last, I don't know, year, the TAM kind of redefined itself. And I do the fun process of like going into GPT or now deep research and asking it to build a TAM for me based on some background. And the numbers I get will vary from like 3 billion to like 1 trillion. And it's hard to argue either side of that equation, because it's all logical. And so I think there's going forward, I'd say for us, the opportunity is we got to stay at the forefront of the technology and the innovation. But really what it means to our customers is I got to deliver them outcomes. And that means materially measurable, different outcomes than they were having before around the stuff they care about, which is in our world, fixing vulnerability. How do we materially reduce our risk, reduce the human effort we need to improve that risk and save money along the way and all the other kind of benefits they want. And so that's kind of our focus, and the TAM along it will be no doubt sufficient to sustain and build a very, very valuable company that would be great for all of our employees, candidly, and our investors. And so that's kind of where we're focused, is like the excitement is awesome. And I think the future, like outside of Pixee, it's exciting. I'll just start there. I really don't know what to say. I hope like everyone, I'm sure everyone on your podcast and everyone kind of in the market, like honestly, try a new tool every 2 weeks. If you're not, you're missing out on some pretty amazing stuff. Like just this morning, actually in our team, there was a Slack conversation. Engineers are unique beings, and I'm one. I can talk about us in that way. Like we have one engineer on our team who was very, let's just say, not a believer in an AI coding assistant in certain ways. She is very particular about the way the code writes. She's thought about how it works and how it wants and the quality of what she expects out of it, different things. And she tried one a year ago and was challenged by another member of her team, like, hey, try this one, try this new one, or not just a new one, an upgraded version of the new one. And literally today, she replied back, mind blown. I'm not like it's doing stuff, it's making mistakes, and then it's troubleshooting its own mistakes and going back through the process recursively, just without me having to do anything. And so, like, not that it's getting everything right or it doesn't get still stuck in loops and go off the deep end, but the level of improvement in just 12 months is really, really mind blowing, even to the most unexpected folks, the people who are the most skeptical in the market. So it's pretty amazing, and I think the future is super exciting for where we are.
Which tools are you using for augmenting code?
We use them all. Our team, like, we leave it up to our team to decide to pick and choose the ones they want. We have folks using Copilot. We have folks using Cursor. We have folks using Devin. We have folks across we have folks just using like Claude Anthropic or GPT, like off the shelf, meaning like straight through prompts and things like that. We have them all. Different folks have different preferences, but we're using them all within the company.
That's cool. Try out Augment Code. It's a great product. I'm getting a lot of good feedback. And you're absolutely right. When I discovered Grok, I thought I discovered oil. I was on it all weekend playing around with it.
Yeah.
But you're right. The rate and the speed of AI, it's exciting. It's definitely an opportunity to build great companies. Do you see yourself as an AI company, or do you see yourself as more of a security company?
I see us as a security company. I think I would even say a developer security company. Like, our whole point is I'm building for outcomes. Like, to the point of where, like, the AI, we are no doubt an AI native company. AI is core to pretty much every feature we build. Now, we don't use it if we don't need to. We have very strong opinions there too, that not everything needs AI, just to be clear. Like, there's places where it's valuable. There's other places where it actually can send you the wrong path. And so we're absolutely an AI native company, but from a corporate perspective, the problem I'm trying to solve is not AI. The problem I'm trying to solve is a security risk, developer productivity challenge. And so that is what we are as a company. And how we do it is using AI techniques and technologies kind of beneath.
And surely it should be an exceptionally exciting time now with a product like yours, because AI probably brings up more challenges, right? More security concerns than ever before.
1,000%. But you just about, like, in our world, like, there's a million dimensions that's clear. But like, let's just say, and this is not hypothetical, like, was it ServiceNow and even Google like talked about, like, 40 to 50% of the new code written in their latest features were written by AI, not by a human. So just imagine if your company is now producing 40 or 50% more source code than it was 6 months ago or 12 months ago. All the systems you have in place to check the quality of that source code, validate the quality of that source code, fix the security of that source code, has just doubled. The amount of capacity you need has just gone up 2x, because you've increased your source code by 50%. And so the need for tools like Pixee, which is automating part of that process of, call it quality, in this case it's security, but call it quality, has only increased, as a matter of fact, and is only going to continue increasing. Like, we're not we're not at a point now. This is where I don't. This is where opinions kind of come into play. Like I'm not at a point where I believe at any point in the near future is like code coming out of AI going to be perfect to an extent where the software company producing that code is going to give you guarantees like this is secure code, it is high quality code, it's never going to break, blah, blah. That's not happening anytime soon. And even when it does, every company has a vested interest in making sure, validating, checking all that. And so I think for us, it's like, how do we keep building on that spectrum as we expect that to keep growing? But the need is only going up significantly.
Absolutely. Is it per user? So does each software engineer have their own Pixee, or is it sold across an enterprise?
It is sold across an enterprise, but as we evolve our product, the idea being is that, again, one of the beauties of LLMs and AI is you can make things highly customized for very specific people in a very generic way, meaning I can build software that will customize Pixie, let's say, for you and each of your 20 developers to behave slightly differently without kind of, from a product perspective, breaking our back to build 20 different products, if that makes sense. And so I suspect that to be in the not too distant future, even for us, if we talk about various ways in which we use memory within the AI, and that memory could be driven by each individual user, it could be driven by a project, it could be driven by a team, it could be driven by an enterprise. There's numerous levels at which you can create that memory that impact the behavior in a very specific case here is applying. So, more to come there, but that is exactly the idea. Like, there's various ways in which we can expand and make the capability highly personal.
There's one thing you said to me before we recorded this. You said that one of the things that you learning from your mistakes, right? And I think one thing you mentioned was not trusting your gut. What was that about?
Yeah. Look, we all have hindsight's 2020. We all say, right? Like, we can look back and say, I wish I didn't do this. I wish I didn't do that. But learning from that is super helpful. We had an example of this when we were doing fundraising. We had another example of it in the product perspective. Like as we were kind of building towards product market fit, one of the things that we kept hearing, even from like the smallest companies to the large enterprises, was like, hey, you're touching my source code. That's sensitive. And like, we're in this world in 2024, say 2025, where every VC you talk to, not just VC you talk to, but every founder you talk to is kind of saying, hey, we're a SaaS company. Like you have to be SaaS because then it makes it scalable. It's cloud. You can grow it, blah, blah, blah. All that makes total sense. And so that means like, of course, every company is comfortable with SaaS offerings. Like they're used to stuff being in the cloud. It's just not true in many specific dimensions. It's like when it comes to source code, I don't care if you're a 2-person company, if you're Pixie, or if you're, I don't know, Netflix, whatever, large enterprise. Your source code is a sensitive topic. It is always going to be, especially in the world of AI now. If they're worried about their source code training models, it becomes even more sensitive, as a matter of fact. And so we went down this path, having heard feedback from like not just like investors, but like investors, people in the market, analysts, other founders, even saying like, no, hold true to your ground. You got to stay this hosted cloud-based service that everyone's going to use, that's going to do this stuff. And that's not what the market was telling us. As a matter of fact, like time and time again, people are like, no, I'm not sending my source code to the cloud, even though I might do it for GitHub. GitHub has earned their right for that. You have not earned your right for that, even with any validations, nor are you going to get there anytime soon. And so we fought it. Finally, we caved and we said, okay, we're going to build for where you can deploy Pixie in a self-hosted environment. Now it's still in a cloud, but it's your cloud. It's not my cloud, right? It's your environment. And literally the day we made that shift, it took us 2.5 months to kind of build for that, to make that transition. Our pipeline would, multi-tenfold difference of like how different the conversations were and how much quicker they could happen. And so, that was an example, like on the product side, is like we went down this path, like just sticking to what everyone told us and what they thought was right, but honestly didn't match what the market was telling us. And our gut was the market, and we waited too long. I wish we'd done that 6 or 12 months sooner. It would have changed a lot.
So that particular example that you just mentioned, what you're saying is the market, people told you to do something, the market told you to do something else, and 6 months later, you went down a different path. Again, as you said, hindsight is 2020. Going back, what would you have done differently?
It's one of those things like it's to your point, like what would we have done differently? Like on the first time someone expected ABC, would we have just stopped, went and built it? Probably not, just because there's a cost to doing that. And it could have just been one or two people. But I do think when you hear the same thing in the fifth and the sixth and the seventh and the eighth conversation, at some point you got to say, hey, this is the time. I don't care if the market is telling me the most valuable companies are PLG led SaaS hosted companies like right now in that time period. That's not what we need to be building because that's not what we are hearing the market will adopt or want or use. And so I just wish we would have done it sooner. And for me, like honestly, for us, time is time is a currency of life, especially for a startup, right? Like I think that the idea being is like, had we done that 6 months sooner, it would have materially made a difference, I think, in kind of where Pixie is, even where Pixie is today, in kind of our short lifespan at this point. So I just wish we would have listened sooner, honestly. What would have been differently, like build for and validate that what we're hearing and not just marking it off as, oh, it's something we can get over because the experts in the industry tell us we can or it will happen.
And the market changes so quickly all the time. So yesterday's expert is maybe today's, they're learning.
I agree.
Um,
It's like this whole topic of like self cloud hosted SaaS type offerings and kind of all the way back to like in hardware, off the cloud in your private infrastructure. Like that topic has certainly regained momentum in just the last, like, again, speaking of time, after we had our epiphany, but like in the last 6 months, there are plenty of people talking about it, especially in the world of AI now. Is like, you don't, people don't trust, well, DeepSeek is one end of the spectrum, but like even OpenAI in their hosted infrastructure, there's very few enterprises ready and willing to trust OpenAI
100%. I hear that all the
to
time. Yeah.
use their sensitive data, right? So what are they doing? They're deploying an OpenAI model in Azure where they get the security guarantees that they want, and they're using it effectively as a self-hosted OpenAI model. And so that's effectively the same exact thing we're doing, which is you self-host Pixie. And so you can still get a lot of the benefits of the cloud, but you don't need this SaaS hosted thing. And so I even saw a company the other day, I forgot the name of the company, that is spinning up to help companies like ours take this package enterprise software and deploy it in different ways. And we use a company like that called Replicated. It's been amazing. But that there's been another company that came out like in that same market. And I think this theme or this technological deployment architecture is only going to revive itself. Honestly, like if we were in the 2020s, like all in on SaaS kind of centrally hosted software solutions, I guarantee you we're already seeing that prevalence come down a little bit in the world of enterprise software, especially. And I think that'll only increase with in the world of AI.
As far as mistakes, you mentioned earlier on that you wish maybe staying in stealth was a bit longer than you would have liked. What were your thoughts on that? Do you feel like maybe you could have come out of stealth sooner, or what did you mean by that?
Every company has their reasons for being in stealth, and generally when you're early on, it's like you want to build to a level of quality that you believe the market will accept, right? And some people say, "Oh, I don't want the competition to build this or build that." Like for us, it was none of that. Like we're betting on our own ability to execute over anyone else's, and so it was not for us. The competition was not really the worry. It was more of like, I want to build for a product of a certain level of quality and validation before I kind of go out there, launch it, start talking about it, et cetera. And so we did that. We were in stealth. Pixie was in stealth for almost exactly a year, maybe a year and a little bit. And it worked out okay. It didn't really impact us in a very negative way. But one thing I wish we would have done is like, I wish we would have made that like shorter, maybe even like 3 or 6 months, honestly. And the idea being is like early adopters or the visionaries on the kind of technology adoption curve, the visionaries and early adopters are okay with some flaws and warts and issues with your software. You gotta have been thoughtful about it and be clear in positioning and all that. But as long as you show a level of quality and maturity with some gaps, that's generally okay. And I think it can accelerate the process of feedback, right? When you're stealth, things are just slower. You have to talk to some folks and it takes like a meeting or two just to get them past what is the stealth and what is the core of what you're working on. And then you could start getting to the meat of the real value. And so I think it just could have accelerated a few conversations here and there. But that's one thing I look back at and kind of, there's some VCs, it's funny, that are kind of very opinionated about this stuff. But, I'd say stealth is not really always a huge benefit, depending on kind of your position and where you're at. And generally speaking, in most cases, you probably don't need one, and certainly not a longer one.
I was saying, I mean, I think it depends on if the concern is, do we release a product too soon and it might fall on its knees, or do we put something out there? We have the early adopters. I mean, they're early adopters for a reason, as you said. I think what I hear in the market, especially from founders, as long as especially from customers, the enterprise customers, the early adopters, is as long as there's intentionality from the founders of building something and iterating and in many parts being more of like a design partner to the founder, they would appreciate that. But you said something else that was interesting. You said that sometimes you don't need to even be in stealth. What are the positives and negatives of being in stealth?
Yeah. Look, I think on the well, let me start with the flip side. Like, there's books around this, and there's theories, and there's programs for like building in public. You've probably seen some of these topics. Like, there's benefits to that, right? If you're trying to build for a little bit of a community, if you're trying to get people involved and kind of go through that process, that journey with you, like where you started from, what you're building for, and as you got there, there's real benefits to that, right? In different ways. And so we did that. We did some of that with our open source. We open source a foundation of what is Pixee, like a core piece of the technology. And that we tried, and we still do really kind of build that in public. Like, it's all open source. We kind of build out so folks can see it and be involved and engaged. And so there's some benefits to that. On the stealth side, like, look, it does remove a little bit of, let's just say, cognitive load, right? In the world in developer experience, we talk about cognitive load, a lot of all the different things you have to deal with. From a founder perspective or an early stage company perspective, like, the stealth does save you some cognitive load, right? Like, you have a website out there. Okay, great. It can be pretty bare bones, but when you have even a bare bones website out there, like, if the messaging changes or your product is doing something different, like, you kind of feel this kind of nagging issue. Like, I still have to update that thing, and I forgot to update our website, or that third sentence that nobody's looking at on your website about some product. So there's a little bit of cognitive load savings for sure, I would say, of being in stealth. It can, there's some companies who've done this phenomenally well, where they use stealth as a FOMO type period, where they're like trying to get folks to get in, like, you're X number 7,852 on the waiting list, exactly, like, invite your friends and we'll bump you up a few spots. There's companies who've done that quite successfully. And so there are ways in which stealth can be really beneficial, but I think generally speaking, if there's not a really clear reason you're in stealth, you may not need to be there, honestly. You might be better off kind of being out in public and kind of iterating from there.
So, Surag, you went from being a corporate executive to being a founder. That is one hell of a transition. What do you enjoy doing more? Being part of the corporate?
The founder.
Really?
Easy. Yeah, easy. I even when I'm in, like, have been in part of big enterprise and organizations, I always love kind of gravitate towards, like, working with the team that has an extreme level of ownership and responsibility, and will do whatever it takes to win, right? Like, I think for us, it's like, I just, that's kind of the way I generally like to operate. And that's the type of people I like to work with and operate with. And so for me, even in the corporate environments, I often found myself working with, like, the little incubator teams, the startups within the startups, like, things like that are kind of where I generally found myself spending the bulk of my time, because I just get excited by that. I joke with my wife, like, my self-diagnosed, like, need to do something different all the time was like, I have a constant drive. Like, I love wearing different hats, and that is satisfied in the world of being a founder, and can be satisfied in the corporate executive world, but you got to find your niches on where it's fun.
So do you feel like now that you've started doing this, let's say Pixee, I mean, I'm sure it will grow to become a big company. Is that the point you think, well, this is not for me, I'm going to pass it on and do another startup? Like, do you have the startup bug, basically?
Yeah, no, look, I know, hopefully this won't be a negative to future investors in Pixee, but people ask me all the time, like, hey, you're CEO, like, what took you to want it, like, why do you want to be CEO? And I tell people, like, look, I am more than happy to be the CEO. I think in some ways I'm qualified in many things I've done, and I do love doing it. But I'm not a CEO because I want to be a CEO, just to be clear. Like, I'm here because I want to build a company. I want to be successful, and I'm passionate about this problem. I love working with people, all that stuff. But, like, my goal in life was not to be a CEO. My goal in life is to build amazing things. And so I tell folks all the time, if and when the time is right, when Pixee needs a different CEO or needs a different direction, needs different leadership, I have no problem, absolutely zero problem handing the keys over to someone else and letting them run with it. And I will more than happily be their sidekick, do whatever I need to do to continue the journey. And so I think being a CEO is no doubt a fortunate position. I'm constantly glad or happy or great. I'm just encouraged that folks are willing to allow me to be their CEO and kind of lead the company. But I'm not here because I dream to be CEO, just to be clear. I am here to build amazing products and companies and deliver outcomes. And if someone needs to be the CEO and I'm the best qualified for it, then great, I'll do it. But that's not why I'm here.
So, one last question I want to ask you about this journey of Pixee, and I guess for the most part, the journey you've seen founders and other companies go through is, what do you feel is the most challenging part or piece to building a company?
I'll answer the building company and I'll talk about CEO in just a moment. Like on the building the company, the most challenging piece is it's the ups and downs. Like it's a roller coaster of the journey, right? I think for many folks, like they're great, like they just take the punches and they keep rolling. They celebrate the wins and take the punches and keep rolling. For many folks, it's really difficult, right? They dwell in the losses or they dwell in the down days, and you learn from that. You have to turn yourself around. And so I think for many folks, like building a startup is a series of ups and downs. There's not all ups. I know we all love drawing our charts like this, but that's never the way it goes. And I think that for me, I think that's the most difficult piece of it, is like you have to be willing to deal with that. And like I said, I think I said earlier on, like many of the best founders I've learned a lot from are those who like put on these blinders and they're so focused on the conviction they have. They're obsessed on the conviction, the problem that they're trying to solve for, that they kind of just ignore the stuff. And sometimes people are like, are you hearing what I'm saying? Are you hearing the stuff that's happening? Are you like numb to this? But like the reality is, like, that's oftentimes what I think makes them the most successful. Like they're just so focused on this thing and obsessed. It's what drives them through the rough days, drives them through the downs. And
Yeah, I feel like if I was to take what you just said and reflect on my time, what I've seen is there was a period in 23 when the market was really down, and we went for 6 months without even realizing the market was down. And it wasn't until somebody had mentioned, how's the market doing for you guys? But because we were so laser focused and just completely ignoring the news, completely ignoring all of a sudden we were getting way more rejections than we used to, but we were just ignoring it and just going after it. So I think you need to have that conviction. You need to have that relentless mindset. And I do believe that's the fundamental component to success, is having that mindset, that discipline. You just keep going.
I ran marketing teams in the past. I had a very similar idea, although in a very smaller scales. Like when you come up with a new, like, say, tagline or a story for a company or a problem, you can't change it on every single feedback. Like you have to have some level of conviction that, like, I'm sticking to this for like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and then I will pause and take a look back. But like if I try and change a word every single conversation, I'm gonna end up with Frankenstein. That's not interesting and completely boring and makes no sense to anyone. But like it's the same thing in this world. Like at some point there, you have to just go through this period with your conviction, and then you have to pause and look back. But you cannot do it at every single turn. Otherwise, you're just like stuck in this like analysis
In the
paralysis
loop,
mode
yeah,
forever.
constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and did you? I mean, I know I did. When I started my first company, I definitely had this imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Do you ever get that? Is that
Of course, all the time. And I think people talk about like being a CEO is the loneliest place in tech, right? Like you get into these roles and you feel like you're not qualified. How did you get there? Why are you there? Not this other person that seems amazingly qualified and perfectly capable and all these different things. And I think it's just like you just have to blast through it. It's not easy. For me, it's like I like to ground myself in non-work stuff when that happens with the family and whatever, the outdoors or doing different activities. And it just kind of makes me like I probably don't. I'm certainly not a great advisor for stuff like this. But like for me, it's like I just try to forget about it as quick as possible, and then I move on to the next thing. And the way I forget about it is like I just ground myself in family or activities or things I enjoy doing or whatever it might be. Trips. I love traveling. I go travel somewhere and do something to get past it, and then it's like gone. Let's get back to it.
I love that. And that's kind of the last couple of things I wanted to touch on is away from the business world and being the founder and CEO of Pixee and all those ups and downs of building a company. What does Surag do outside of work? How do you keep yourself? Because it's a challenging game, right? You're constantly at it. You're probably up at night thinking about what problem you need to solve tomorrow. But how do you switch off? What when you do switch off, what do you do to
Totally.
have that downtime?
For me, it varies and it rotates a little bit, but like, look, for me, family has always been a huge part of what drives me from when I was a kid all the way through now. And so spend a ton of time with my family wherever I can. I have two little girls. And so they're at an age right now where like I can occupy, or we can occupy together an hour a day, a week, a month, like depending on whatever we want to go through. And so that is great. I can spend some time with them on different things. I was selling Girl Scout cookies on Friday. I am at soccer on whatever, actually not soccer, dance right now is the thing they love doing. And so there's things like that. So family is a huge part of what takes up my free time. Other than that, like, I love being active. Now I wish I would spend more time doing that. I don't hit ultra marathon. I have colleagues who do, and I'm so impressed by where they find the time to do that. But I like to being active in different ways, and I find ways to make it happen. And then like other things, like in the combination of all the day, we love to travel, and then I love to geek out and just I'm people say like it's still tech, and I know, but like I do love reading random news about anything. And so this weekend I was actually, my wife got so upset, like we had our network at home went out, and I had to get a new switch to power our Wi-Fi and cameras and stuff. And instead of buying a brand new one, which is like $500, you just plug in and all works. Like I'm gonna get like an older one. Yes, to save a little bit of money, but more importantly, like I get to actually make it work. So I got to like log into the CLI and program the Cisco switch that was like 10 years old or whatever. And it was just like I spent, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours doing it, but it was fun for me. It was just like I got to get in there. I got to get reconnected to 10 or 15-year-old software, make it work. And here we are back up and running, but it took me 3 hours. It could have taken me 20 minutes if I just bought something off the shelf. So I do enjoy doing some of that stuff on the technology side, like home automation and different networking and different stuff like that. So that's been fun to follow. So like this world of AI, yes, it's a professional thing for me with Pixee and all this world, but like just reading about it is for me personally interesting too. I just love getting into the how and the what's next part of what's being built.
I mean, honestly, saving so much time for us as recruiters. A lot of things that we used to do before, manual tasks, we just don't do, and we're spending a lot more time, being able to do stuff like this, which is pretty cool.
Have you found it giving you more time to get into like deeper topics on like alignment of like, I don't know, the personality types or other types of things you wish you had more time to evaluate, but you never did?
Yeah, so we have quite a rigorous process that we follow from a candidate journey, and it's all around identifying the need of the individual. And you have this conversation, you understand what their skill sets are, and you think, okay, great, I know where this is going to be needed in our portfolio. But the key thing of closing any candidate is it's more about identifying that match between what they want out of their career. I believe the biggest three decisions you make in your life is where you work, who you spend your life with, your partner, your life partner, and where you live. Because if you look at these three things, they take a huge amount of your time. So when you think about career being one of those things, just getting into the depth and into the core of the candidate's journey and need. Sometimes we're having this conversation, we call it fact findings analysis, is identifying the real true need behind any fact that a candidate might bring up. Once you get to that core need, and sometimes they have this moment, the candidate, oh, I didn't even realize this. Like I knew I thought it, but you've kind of took me down this path. But that journey now is, we're able to get there a lot quicker with AI because of the tools and the automation and the different things that we have. A lot of, I say easily 60 to 70% of the stuff we used to do before, we don't do anymore because of AI. So it definitely allows us to get there quicker. What might have been a 6 weeks process of getting there, we can now do in 2 to 3 weeks because of these tools, which is pretty cool. One last question I have for you. So there's a tradition that we are setting with this podcast, is asking our guest at the very end And by the way, I've truly enjoyed speaking to you. I had a lot of fun, and it really has been a good opportunity for me to learn as well, which I love. Honestly, sometimes I feel like I should pay a tuition fee for just sitting here and having these conversations because I'm learning so much. I get to ask what I want.
My wife asked me just this weekend, she's like, do you ever see yourself being a professor? We were walking around Stanford campus. And I was like, no, I can't listen to myself speak that long like, without being in that world, but I don't see it, at least not for me.
I think what it is, right, is learning, to your point, is, learning by doing, but also learning by listening, I feel. Like truly actively listening to understand, not to respond, and just sitting back and trying to soak it all in. So I really want to thank you for that. But the last question I want to ask you is very much in line with learning. And for anyone that knows me, they know that I love reading. So the question I have for you is, have you read a book or have you come across a book that, when you think about the journey you've been through as a founder, that truly resonated, and going back, you think, that's a book I would recommend any new founder or any existing founder to read if they haven't done so already?
Maybe two. I'll give two if you don't mind. One is a book I was handed. One is a book I was handed in grad school, and it's funny. My wife will laugh because I'm not the biggest reader. I love getting the distillation down of these books, but for me, like reading a long book, I just fall asleep. Like my natural body just falls asleep. But one of the books that from some time back, and today my world is like I've used Blinkist to get like downloads of books in the easiest ways, but get them. But one that still sticks with me to this day was a book called Never Eat Lunch Alone. It was actually something our professor or the administrator of the entire program gave to all the students and said, hey, look, you're at a point in your careers where you got to realize networking is as important as anything else in the business. And so there's this it was a great book. I've actually reread it a couple times since then. And so that one is one, especially from a founder perspective, and even just a corporate perspective, I think is a really good one. The other one is a blog. It's actually a series of articles that I think I found the most interesting, which are, one is a blog called, it's actually, I don't think it's all that active anymore, but it was active for quite some time, like Wait But Why. Wait But Why is a gentleman named Tim Jefferson. He has the most insightful topics. Like he'll talk about like various kind of deep tech theories. He's done like an article on Elon Musk and kind of what he's done in the past. But he writes these kind of very thoughtful and funny articles about like time. You're talking about like the three things that individuals spend their time on. He has this article, I wish I remember the name of it, this article like where he draws out in these funny like stick diagrams where humans spend their entire time in their lives and like how much time you have left doing different things in your life. Like for example, watching a movie with your kids on a Friday night. Like he'll draw that out in a picture. Like you have like 27 of them in your lifetime. By the time that they're 18 or whatever, I'm making up the number. By the time they're 18, you're gonna have like 4 left. So make it worth it, like when you go through this journey. So there's some very like thought-provoking articles that he has that I love reading. I go back and read them all the time, but I'd highly recommend. It's like a long form type blog format where he goes into these really deep topics and spends some time talking about them. So Wait But Why and Never Eat Lunch Alone.
That's definitely amazing recommendation. I'm going to look into both of them. Surag, it was honestly a pleasure. I want to thank you wholeheartedly. It was a lot of fun. I like learning, just like yourself. I find this has been definitely an insightful conversation, especially for founders who are on that early journey. You touched on some very critical points around the validation piece, how you thought about that principles. I've not heard that before. That's pretty cool. And then again, the fundraising piece. Awesome. Surag,
thank you. This has been a pleasure. Your questions have been amazing. And I just, the topics, I love kind of covering these different pieces. And like I said, just from the questions you asked, there's a lot of kind of retrospective and introspection that kind of has to happen, which is really amazing and fun. So thank you for having me on. I'm around for anyone who ever needs help or wants to talk about anything, ping me, and happy to help.
I was just going to say, if any potential people that want to reach out as potential customers, employees, whatever, whoever they may be, what's the best way to reach you?
Find me on LinkedIn, Surag Patel, or just my email, Surag, SURAG @pixee.ai. It's great.
Awesome. Surag, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We'll do this again.
Thanks.
This podcast was brought to you by Serana Labs and powered by Harrison Clark. At Harrison Clark, we're at the heart of Silicon Valley's evolution and at the intersection of search and venture, funding the companies shaping the future and connecting them to the most elite cloud, data, and AI talent. To learn more, visit harrisonclark.com. If today's episode challenged your thinking, then share it with someone who's driving innovation. For even more insights on achieving product market fit, subscribe to our newsletter, The PMF Playbook, where we break down the journey from zero to product market fit. Visit thepmfplaybook.com. For more episodes, follow us on social media or visit insidethesiliconmind.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind. See you soon.